Guys, hey, my name is Andres, the Baking Steel Studio here, coming live from Grand Rapids, Michigan. We have special guests, honored to have Mike Rohde with us today. Mike, say hello.
Hey everybody, how you doing? Here from chilly Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
It's cold everywhere. We kind of got the whole thing covered. So today, real quick, we're going to talk about dough. It's a dough hangout. I'm going to make some dough for us. Mike's has this really creative way of capturing like dialogue and note taking, things that are just really phenomenal, like how he diagrams it. And we're going to share this with you. His expertise is not just pizza, but in note taking. And so he's going to kind of dialogue, note take what we talk about, and then we're going to share that and just show you how he kind of organizes his thoughts. Something that we could all probably do better with, pizza making and life in general. So I'm going to let Mike introduce himself to you guys so you guys can say hello, and we'll take it from there. Mike?
Yeah. Well, hey everyone, it's great to be here with Andres. We are really excited about doing this session with you and showing you this crossover, this interesting crossover. I'm Mike Rohde. I'm a designer and author, and the book that I wrote is called The Sketchnote Handbook. And sketchnoting is basically this way of using visuals to make your notes richer. And we'll talk in a minute about that as well. I've been doing this for a long time. The book came out about 12 years ago now. It's a bestseller. It's in multiple languages. And it's really helped a lot of people who, actually a lot of people with ADHD really like this technique because it keeps their body busy so that their minds can think. And so it's just an interesting way to capture information. And I think it could especially be valuable in the case of pizza making and dough making, because, if you're doing this repeatedly, having a reference point to go back to say, what did I do last week? And to be able to see those notes and maybe have visuals to help you, put things together again could be really valuable. So that's what this is going to be about. I'll be sketchnoting Andres as he's making dough, and then we'll show you what that looks like after we're done, and you can sort of see what that looks like. And I'll give some tips on how you can do it too. I mean, my whole thing is about you having the ability to take these notes because it's not as hard as you think it is.
That's awesome. And I'm reading a bunch of comments here. People already have your book, read your book. Someone
Nice.
teaches your book in their class for seniors,
All right.
college
That's
prep.
awesome.
Unbelievable stuff, right? I agree. And it's mind blowing. Mac, I don't even know how we met. It must have been on Instagram, Mike.
I think so.
I was just like so intrigued. I think you sent me a couple of books. I'm like, wow, these are amazing. And man, I wish I had that in school. Something I'm gonna share with my kids because, as you know, note taking can be daunting if you're just writing down for the sake of writing it down. But this kind of makes, I think it's more interactive, right? Is what you do, and it probably helps joggle the memory a bit more as we're writing as well. So
Right.
I'm fired up. So this
That's
is
good.
great. This is gonna be really fun. So are we ready to rock? I mean,
I think so. Do you maybe before we get started, I would
yeah.
show a couple of samples on my camera for y'all.
Well, that'd be great.
So to give you a sample of what the sketchnoting, let's see, how do I get this to the right place? So this is an example of, I was kind of nuts and I decided to make pizzas for my company, and I needed to make 22 or 23 little mini crusts that people could make personal pizzas with. But all I had was a gas grill, and Andres was like, "Oh, you're insane, man! You can't do pizzas on a gas grill." But I proceeded, and so this is my little sketch as I tried to work out like, how big should the pizza blanks be? How many do I need? And then I was thinking about like, what's the heat signature of the grill, and where should I put the steel, and how should I bake things? And it ended up changing once I got on site. One of the big problems of the grill was once you lift the lid, all the heat goes away. And I mean, the steel's doing what it can, but it's got limitations, right? So that's an example. The other example I'll show you is this one. This is probably more like maybe what you would end up producing. So this is my Friday night pizza night. So I put the date and the time. I added some notes, and I basically documented the kind of pizzas I made that night. So I made one circular pizza, which is what Anders teaches mostly. But then I had bought this jelly roll pan I wanted to test. So I actually documented the different tests I did and sort of the outcomes in the jelly roll pan. So it was helpful for me to get a sense of like, how does this jelly roll pan, can I use it? Will it produce what I want? And it gave me sort of a baseline. And then the last thing I'll show you before we get going is, so these are the 5 basic shapes of drawing. You'll see these in my book. In the chat, I'm going to put in a link to my free YouTube video that explains how these work. So basically, if you think you can't draw, these 5 shapes will help you draw almost anything. And it really lowers the bar so you don't have to feel like I have to be an amazing artist to do anything. You can start with really basic shapes.
That's amazing. That's great advice too. I love it. I mean, I can't wait to learn how to draw better.
So I just put a link. You'll see me. It's a YouTube link. You go
Mhm.
watch that. I think it's 20 minutes long, and it takes you through the whole concept of
Oh,
sketch
neat.
noting. So you can
That's
do that
cool.
on, after this event if you like, and so we don't hold up.
Sure.
We're here for the dough, not necessarily for the sketches. So
We can do both, right? We can do both.
yeah,
So, can you guys all see my screen okay? I'm gonna do a top down. Mike, can you see my screen good or is it?
yeah, I can.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. I'm gonna switch it over. So first, before I jump into this, I'm gonna make dough and I'm gonna talk out loud so Mike can kind of understand what I'm doing and take his notes and what I do when I'm making dough. So today's great because I actually have a pizza party on Friday night and I'm feeding a bunch of hockey players. It's gonna be amazing. Hungry guys. I'm gonna make a ton of dough like between today, basically, so I can ferment it for 2 days. And I'm gonna do a small batch now, just for the class sake, but this is what I would do for a Friday night pizza. So it would be a 48-hour dough. Really good. I'm making it for kids, so I feel like the younger doughs, like the 1 and 2 and 3 days, or 1 or 2 days, are really good for the kids. If I was doing an adult party, I might have made my dough yesterday. However, it's going to be amazing that we can do this in 2 days. So I'm going to make our 72-hour dough. I'm going to take it through all the steps. I'm going to show you my top down, and we'll talk ingredients. When you guys have questions, please drop them in the box, and we'll get to them when we have pauses in our conversation here today. So here is my digital scale. This is a mandatory piece of equipment. I want to dial in my flour to water ratio. We call that a baker's percentage. And the really only way to dial that in is by using a digital scale. And this is by grams, really important. I'm using my dough container that we have from Baking Steel. I think we're sold out currently, but we have some more coming in. You can use a bowl or anything else. I place that on my scale and there's a tare button, T-A-R-E. What I do with the tare is it just zeroes it out when I place something on top. So it acts like 0. Now I've pre-measured 500 grams of organic bread flour in my bowl here. So that's what I've got so far. And next, I'm gonna use my next ingredient I like to use is sea salt. I use 16 grams of sea salt in this batch. So I basically just kind of slowly pour it in my dough, my flour. Once I hit 16, I'm gonna take a whisk and just whisk that salt around in the flour. I want each ingredient to go in the bowl separately so I can whisk it. I don't want my salt and my yeast coming in direct contact right now. It can kill off some of the yeast. So we whisk it together, right? And now for my yeast, I'm using active dry yeast. This is a Fleischmann's. This is a 4-ounce glass container. I'm gonna make a micro amount of yeast goes into the bowl. I'm gonna show you what that looks like. For this, I need a micro scale. You might remember these from college dormitories. When guys would be selling marijuana, they'd be measuring their ingredients with these micro scales. I don't know that from experience. Anyway, so I again, this is gonna measure to the 1/100th of a gram, which is a micro, right? So I put my cap down, I tear it out again. Oops. I tear it out to 0, and now I'm gonna add for 1 gram. It is such a small amount. But that's exactly 1 gram there. So if I pour this into my palm, you can see it's probably the size of a quarter, maybe. And as a reference point, those yeast packages that you see in the market, those like foil packages, each one of those is 9 grams. So we're using 1/9 of a gram of yeast, which is a small amount. The next what I'll do is I'll take this yeast, I will dump it into my flour mixture, and again, I'm just gonna whisk. And someone's gonna ask, there's no reason for me to bloom my yeast into my water first to make it bubble. And the reason is because yeast is now commercially made, and I've made dough thousands of times over the last like several years, and not one time has my yeast not like worked. I refrigerate it. I always keep it, I keep an expiration date on top here. This lasts like a year in my fridge, and not one time have I needed to bloom it. And a lot of the recipes say bloom your yeast first, make sure it's alive and active. Well, guess what? It's going to be almost 100% of the time, unless you're storing it in a really hot area, you're fine. So now what I'm gonna do is zero my scale out again. I'm gonna add water. It's 350 grams of water, which is 350 divided by 500 grams of flour is 70%. So this is a 70% hydrated dough, which is not a beginner dough. It's a very, it's for an avid baker. But that's what's going to create those like air pockets that we love and the moisture inside of the dough. I drink filtered water, so I cook with filtered water. And this is a reverse osmosis water filter I use, and I love it.
And that's 300 grams, Andres? That's 300 grams?
350.
350, okay. I wanted to verify that. Yeah.
Yep, 350 in there. And now all my ingredients are in my container here. What I'll do next is I'll just I can do this a couple of ways. I can just shake this bowl. I can just take like a dough scraper and just let that water spread out into the flour mixture. And I do this for about, a minute or two, and you'd see it's a little less liquefied. The flour is starting to absorb some of that water. And now what I'll do is I'm going to take it out of the, in fact, I'm going to switch the camera view here for you guys. And see what I'll do is I'm going to take this, dump it out into the countertop. Right? And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna knead this all together. And I do this by pressing down. I like these dough scrapers, so I can kind of scrape underneath it. This is not a very highly skilled job. I'm just scraping and pressing. Right? And by doing this, I'm eliminating any of the dry flour clumps that might be present. I just lightly press. And if I'm new to doing this and I don't really know what I'm to do, I'll put a timer on, and I'll do this for about 3 minutes, 3 or 4 minutes of just pressing and moving. I can't overdo it. I'm not worried about that. There's nothing I can do to really damage these glutens in the flour or any of that. I'm just lightly pressing. And if you've noticed, this is like a little chef's trick here, or baker. I've got 2 hands. Only one of my hands is engaged in the flour mixture. My other one is dry. So if my phone rings or I need to grab something out of the fridge, I'll have a clean hand. It's mostly clean to do my other duties if I have one. So one hand dirty, one hand clean, or one hand wet, they should say, right? I think that's what they say. So now I'm just I'm lightly pressing. It gets really sticky. To me, that's my tell that the water and the flour are kind of hydrating really nicely together because of the stickiness. It can get really sticky. That's okay. I can scrape my hand off. And what I'll do when this is about, it's after about 2 or 3 minutes, I've got one large ball of dough here. I'm going to place it back in my dough container, just like this. I'm going to grab my lid. Right? Grab my lid. There's my dough. I'm gonna put this aside now and let that ferment for the next like 24 hours. And I'm just rinsing my hand off right now, my dirty hand. That is my that's how I mix dough. It's that easy. on a skill level of 1 to 10, it's probably like a 3. It's super simple. I want to thoroughly mix it. I want to now leave this at room temperature. Room temperature to me it's winter now, so I don't like, this is my studio. I don't blast the heat, but I keep it around 67, 68 degrees up to like 72 for the next 24 hours. And now if I'm going to drop the heat to 65, I can stick this dough container into my oven, which would be a little bit warmer, right? It might be like 75 in there, 72 in there. Let that proof overnight. That's what I did last night. So when I came in today, I've got a batch of dough ready to rock and roll. 24 hours. Tomorrow, I will take these containers and I'll put these into my fridge. And that's called, we're going to slow the fermentation process down. That's called a cold ferment. And a cold ferment essentially is just slowing the fermentation down a little bit. It's still fermenting, it's still developing flavors, and the natural gases inside. The chemical reaction is taking place. It's at a slower pace. And we find between 2 and 4 days to be ideal. And the longer it waits, the better the flavor becomes in that dough. That's really our 72-hour dough. It's super simple. It's really versatile. It works for, pizza, breads, you name it. It's incredible. And the idea is to get really fine ingredients. I'm using an organic bread flour from Central Milling, which is my go-to. I have another batch coming in today, in fact, which is phenomenal. And I just love, and I just recommend getting organic. I just think it's a better product. It's cleaner, less chemicals made. And also, I'm using bread flour because it has a higher protein content. I want that protein to strengthen my dough, and for that longer fermentation, it needs higher protein. For example, if I use all-purpose flour and a 3-day ferment, it's not going to really hold up well. So a longer fermentation, you need to use a stronger flour. Mike, how's that?
That's pretty good. I'm going to show you. I'm just going to do one little stroke here and
Great.
show you all what I did. So this is totally, I kind of like this because it forces me to really think on my feet. I didn't have anything pre-planned. I just used a sheet of paper. So let's pop it up and then I'll walk through
Oh my goodness.
what it looks like.
That's
so
unbelievable. You just did all that? Wow.
Yeah. So this is a lot of it is practice, right? Because I'm practicing. I'm trying to get this stable so you all can see it.
That's amazing.
So I started over, that's backwards for me. So I started first, you talked about the importance of the scale, a digital scale in grams, and that the tare was an important thing if someone's not used it before, to know which button to use to reset, right? And then you talked about your dough container, so I drew that, had the flour in it. And then you can start to see I've got numbering. So I begin with the flour to the right of that. And that's step one. And into that goes the salt, which is 16 grams. And then I sort of made a little space there. You talked a little bit about separating salt and flour from the yeast, just a little bit. So you separated that. You made some offhand comments like, well, first you talked about using a digital scale, right? I don't know, is that getting fuzzier or is it getting clear?
A little bit. I think it was, yeah, we step it back just maybe an inch or two, like there. Yeah.
I'm trying to let my little camera.
It's amazing. It looks incredible, by the way.
And we'll send you a picture of this. So
yes.
Then you see I'm showing that little microscale, which I have as well. And you mentioned it's 1/100th of a gram, right? So it's really fine. And you mentioned you showed it in your hand. I didn't show that, but I did that. I like that comparison. It's about the size of a quarter, right? So it gives you a eyeball sense for what that would be. And then you mentioned that those commercial packets, which I've used in the past, it's about 1/9, right? So it gives you again like this orientation reference point. So now then you talk, the next step is putting in the water. So you can see that step, I think 3 or 4. Did I miss a step? I don't know. 1, 2, 3. 4 would be then you're starting to scrape. You're putting you're doing the scraping. You mentioned 3 minutes is a good kind of a guide for how you're going to do that. You mentioned too that stickiness is an indicator that that's a good thing, right? You're 70%. Your 70% hydration is right where it should be. And then you end up with this dough ball, right? So you've got a dough ball. You put it, you put it into the container. So I think the step 4 is here where you're saying, I mentioned you're using your dough knife, right, to kind of move it back and forward to get it going, and then you took it out. So maybe the thing, if I were to redo this, I might
Mhm.
show that action of you flipping the container over and getting it on the counter.
Oh, sure. Wow.
Here I'm limited in space. So like if let's say we went back through this and you said, "Hey Mike, let's do a visual of making the dough." That might be a really good feedback point to say, well, if we're going to share this as a graphic that people could download and look at, we would add some additional things and put them in a certain order. But this is a good starting point for like capturing information. I think that's most important, is that you're capturing the information. So now if you go back, you probably got 80-90% of the information you need is on this little card, right? And then
Mhm.
you would go, so then you move it in, you do this 4, you put it on the counter, and then you put it inside the container. And here I mentioned, you put it in the fridge for 24 hours. So then the last part is coming up here and putting it in the fridge to let it ferment slowly. So we can definitely, I'll take a picture of that. Maybe we can work together and like refine it and do a single pager that we could share with people. Might be fun to do. So yeah, that's just sort of winging it.
I think it's unbelievable.
Now, people might say, "Oh, that's a lot," but part of it is practice. So I would say that the really good news for people that say they can't draw or can't draw well is that sketchnoting is way more about listening, actively listening to what's being said, and then thinking in the context of the way you listen, how do I turn that into a visual, a simple visual I can draw that will help me remember that information? That's really what it's all about. So if you can listen well, and even if it's a bad drawing, as long as it represents the thing you were thinking about, it works for retention and bringing back those ideas. So I think it can be really valuable.
It's amazing sketching that you just did. That's really incredible as a visual to do it that quickly too. I'm guessing the rookies won't be able to do it quickly, but we could do it thoroughly like you did.
Right.
It'll just really help. And someone, we'll get to some questions now from you guys, because there's some great questions in here, covering what we just discussed. And I'll get to the first one here is, can I cut this recipe in half, and would you do it by baker's percentage? And one of the real advantages of using baker's percentage is that, I mentioned earlier that this recipe is 70% hydrated, flour to water. So yes, in fact, I have to make, and Mike, you've made multiple pizzas before. I need to scale up to like, call it even 10 pizzas. So how I would get there is, okay, 10 pizzas for rough math, if I want 10 pizzas and each pizza dough is gonna be 250 grams, right? I just need to figure out, I need 25. I mean, how do I get 250 grams times 10 pizzas is 2,500 total grams. So I need to work backwards from there. And that's basically what I'll do for Friday night. I'll say, okay, I need X amount of pizzas. It's going to cost me, if I use 1,000 grams of flour, I need 700 grams of water. That's 1,700 divided by 250 is almost perfect math there, right? So I might want to scale that up just a little bit. What might that would be 1,700 divided by 250. That would be 6.8 doughs. So,
Okay.
right, I would probably make double that. So 2,000 grams again, that would give me about 14 doughs. Isn't that amazing? So I just scale that up or down all day long, and everything has a percentage. My salt does, which is like 0.03% or 3% salt. Don't quote me on these numbers, but it's all in the recipe. It's 3 divided by 500. Let me tell you exactly. 3 divided by 500, 0.006. No, is that right? 16 divided by 500, 0.03. So 3.2% salt. So I would take 70% water, 3% salt. I think it's like 0.05% yeast, and just multiply that up or down. So you can cut it in half, you can double it, and you'll always be dead on accurate using percentages.
I suppose you could even set up like an Excel spreadsheet with these basic things and make
Yeah,
a
great
calculator, right?
point. Yeah. And by the way, a lot of people do that. In fact, there's dough calculators out there can do it for you. We should probably have one for everybody.
Yeah.
Question. All right, let's get to some more questions here. 350 grams of water, right? Mike, someone saying great summary. I don't think I could draw that well. Any comments on that?
Oh yeah, I sort of led with for him that for Kevin that this is I'm practice 15 years of practice certainly helps me. And it's not perfect. We would go back and refine it, but at the core, if I gave this to someone, they could probably make a relatively decent dough, I guess. I don't know, but
I think,
I think maybe if I were to give people who are here homework, if you watch the video, the beauty of a video is you could pause it. So what you could do is get your sheet of paper out and you could do the same thing. You can look at my sketch note and see kind of how I'm representing it. And you could get to the point where what did Anders say? And then you could wind it back. Oh, that's 350, right? And then you can write that stuff in. So you're not under the pressure of me being insane and trying to do this while he's talking. I mean, he's even trying to be slow, but Anders, you kind of don't do anything slow, do you? I mean,
try
other than
to,
waiting for pizza dough to get fermented, but so take advantage of that pausability, right, or the space that you have to document.
that's amazing. Good, great guidance. Someone that said Fleshman's packet says 1 package of yeast is about 2¼ teaspoons. That's correct. So that's 9 teaspoons of, I'm sorry, 9 grams. Because each quarter teaspoon's about 1 gram, and that's how we got to that math. Again, that's not going to be as accurate as it's hard to measure. I mean, I think I do have a quarter teaspoon measurement. You can get that, but do I level it off? Do I know, are there air pockets? That's why a scaling is going to be so much more accurate. Really recommend that.
Can I make a comment about scaling?
Yeah,
Since we're
please.
on that topic. So when I first started doing your pizza dough too, I was like, oh, he's doing this in grams. I don't know. And it turns out that my wife had an old scale that she got from a weight loss program, and I used that for I don't know 9 months. And then
That's
I looked
amazing.
around on Amazon and scales are really cheap, really good quality scales are not that expensive. And now
Not
I
at
love
all.
it. I know it's always exactly right. I'm not, like you said, should I flatten it off? Is there a pocket? So I think having that consistency really seems to help.
Yeah, by the way, this is
Delivery,
this is I've had this for like 8 years. It's called My Way. It was like $30.
Yeah,
And these micro scales, again, these
that's
are
like
like
10
10,
bucks.
these are
Yeah,
like
I have one of
under
those.
$10 on Amazon. So I mean, it's why I don't carry them. I can't compete with that price. It's just like literally $10 for these scales. It's amazing. So I would, yeah, make that investment for sure. Next question, can I freeze the dough ball? And if so, should be coated in oil and wrapped in plastic first? How long will it last in the freezer? That's a really great question, Kate. We've done a lot of practice with freezing dough. We had to ship some. In fact, I told this story in class. I'm gonna say it again. I made dough for a very famous person. I can't mention their name, like about a month, maybe a month ago before Christmas, like as famous as they get in Hollywood. I was asked to make dough and I did. I froze it and I had experience. So this is what I did. And I was super nervous about this batch. It wasn't the most important batch I ever made, but it was like the most, I don't know. What's a good word for that? I was more nervous about this batch of
It's
dough than,
tricky.
yeah, it was tricky. So I made dough just the way I showed you guys. I made a batch of dough just like this. And I fermented it for 24 hours at room temperature. Then I put it in the fridge. And I had to freeze this dough because I had to overnight it to Florida. And for me, the way I did that is so I had the UPS, so the dough's already fermented for 72 hours. Okay. I got in here on the studio Monday morning by like 8 or 9 o'clock. I made my dough balls. I took those dough balls and I froze them right away. I froze them from 9 a.m. to like 3 p.m. So like 6 hours because I wanted these to thaw by the time they got to Florida. So it was a 24-hour trip, right? I overnighted the package. So when they arrived, I put them in delis, little delis that look, this is a glass one, but it's like a 2-cup deli. This is 2 cups here with a lid. So when they start to proof, they're gonna proof beautifully. So make your dough balls first, then freeze. And if you don't have a deli, wrap it in plastic wrap. It doesn't need oil on the outside, surprisingly, because it's just cold. Plastic wrap, then I put the plastic wrap into a freezer bag. So kind of double whammy, if you will. So yes, it can be frozen up to about 30 days. If I know I'm freezing dough, I might add a little bit more yeast. Instead of 1 gram, I may add 2 because the yeast will die off in the freezer. So a little bit more just gives you a little bit more assurance it's going to work great. And we did a blog post on that too, not that long ago. It's on our post, on our website. I really like the King Arthur 00 flour. I get it at Costco. It works well with me. It works as well as Italian 00 flours. 00 flour is essential for pizza. Neil, great question. Yeah, there's a lot of brands. I'm not sure where King Arthur gets their 00 flour, guessing from Italy. And I personally love bread flour from Central Milling. It's a high gluten protein. It's a beautiful flour. Now, Mike, you and I might do tests all week in here in the studio. You might determine that, you know what, Anders, I actually like the 00 better. And I might say, you know what, I like the bread flour better. There's no right or wrong answer. It's just what you prefer and what you love. And you might even take half bread flour and half 00 flour and combine them and make kind of your own flour up, right? And see what that tastes like. So there's really no right or wrong answer. Everyone has their own opinion towards that. But my only thing is I just go organic if you can. Organic and high protein content. I got mine from Tropical Traditions. I have not heard of tropical traditions before. Georgiana, is freezing yeast okay? I think we answered that a couple of questions back. Yes. The whole container, no, I don't think I would freeze the whole container of yeast. And I'm just doing that from intuition. I don't know how long that would last, but maybe, geez, I don't know. I don't know that answer. I would probably say no. Because I do know when I freeze dough for longer periods of time, if anything, like after 2 months, the dough loses some vitality. It won't spring and oven spring is back. And I'm guessing because the yeast is dying down. So again, if I'm making dough and I know I'm freezing it, I'm going to add a little bit more yeast. Yes. Yeah, and the jars are great. Where'd my jar go? This costs $7, $8 maybe. It's 113 grams. I make a lot of pizza and I still have mine from like 3 or 4 months ago. It's going to last a long time. I actually buy it. Yeah. I buy extra ones and store them at room temp too, just to always have because of that last fiasco we had with COVID. So I hope, and Georgiana is asking about the difference between bread flour and 00 flour. I think the way they grind it, the 00 flour is a little finer. I think it's also made for higher temp ovens, like brick ovens. It's made to withstand that higher temp and cook beautifully. And it does. Was the fermentation time 24 hours at room temp and then 48 hours in the fridge? Hi, Ritu. Yes. Right, Mike, we did 24 hours room temp and we did 2 days in the fridge. You can use variations of that too. If your schedule says, hey, I made my dough early in the morning, I only had 12 hours at room temp, stick it in the fridge, that's fine too. I've had batches where I stuck it right in the fridge because I knew I was going away and I wanted dough when I came back. So just a variable. I also know, just that said, I'll make dough today and make pizza tomorrow with a pure room temperature fermentation. It's great. It's awesome. In fact, my kids sometimes prefer that. Doesn't have that sour taste. Mike, you and I just talked about that the other day, didn't we?
Yeah. My little boy, when I first started this, he did not like the sour flavor of the 72-hour dough. So that instead of making it on Tuesday night, I made it on Wednesday night and took a day off. And he seemed to be fine. Now, of course, I'm also into baking bread. So now he loves my sourdough bread. So he doesn't mention sour anything. So I'm now moving back to the 72-hour because I like how it performs.
Yeah, it's amazing. And it gives it more color. It does a few different things, more flavor, more color in your crust. It's just, I've made with Central Milling bread, I've made 7-day bread. Like literally I'll take this container and let's say there was snow and I just couldn't get back into my studio here and I hadn't been able to be here for 4 or 5 days, 7 days. I'll take this, I'll make a big loaf out of it. It's phenomenal, like incredible. Let's see. Rapid rise, instant yeast, acting, what do you, can you use rapid rise? This is active dry yeast. They have a rapid rise yeast. If I'm switching out, I would use the same ratio. I wouldn't change. I think there might be a little difference in how they react, but just to keep it simple, 1 gram is going to be active. It's going to be fine. What range of protein percent for high protein flour? I think personally anything over like 12 or 13% is ideal for the high protein flours. And that's on the bag somewhere. You'll see that. Is that instant yeast? That's the question I'm asking. Oh, is this one? This is not instant yeast. This is active dry yeast. There's a little bit of a difference between this and instant yeast. I don't know what's different about it. I use active dry yeast all the time. Mike, do you have any insight on that? Have you?
No, I think I've got the instant yeast in my fridge, and
Yeah.
I've never thought about it. I think maybe it's a little quicker, I guess.
Yeah, right. Maybe a little faster
They-
acting.
They've separated it into the aggressive stuff and the less aggressive stuff and put it in two different bottles. I don't know.
Do we need to adjust the water if we use 00 flour? We do not. We stick with that same formula, 70% hydration. Now, with that said, you might want to test it. Like I like 70% not for beginners. I've made dough at 60%. I've made dough at 75%. Speaking of which, when I made my dough for that special like event in Florida a few weeks back, I amped my dough up to 72% for that. Because I know a little bit more water is really cool. It just adds a little bit more bubbles into that dough. So my point is just play around with that. If I plan on making several pizzas, should I give the baking steel time between pizzas to come back up to room temperature? Oh, a baking steel. What is that? We haven't talked about that today. Great question. If I'm making several pizzas, what do I do in between? Because we know when we open the oven up, heat escapes. And when I put a cold dough on a hot steel, the steel is going to lose some temperature. When it's baking in the oven for 5 minutes, the steel loses some temperature. I have found as a rule of thumb, when I remove a pizza, I make my next pizza and I launch it into the oven about 3 to 5 minutes, depending how fast I'm working. By the time my pizza's done, my steel is back up to temperature. That's the big difference between a baking steel and a pizza stone. The steel continuously bounces right back up to 500 degrees or whatever temperature it's set to very fast. And that's the beauty of a baking steel. I mean final result in dough with starter and instant yeast. Can you clarify? Oh, is the 72-hour dough the same recipe? Yes.
I think, Andres, I was going to mention when you started out, you mentioned that you were going to do 48-hour dough for your hockey players because that's what you're going to do this week. But I think you call it the 72-hour dough as a general rule. And you shrink it as time allows, right?
That's
Ideally,
right.
you do 72, but if you only have 48, it still works. If you only have 24, it still works.
Yes,
it's all the same stuff, right? It's a time question.
Oh yeah, same. Great point, Mike. Yeah, exactly. It's just always the same recipe for me. It's always that same baker's percentage we talked about earlier. It's just a matter of time for me. If I'm making it for the president, or that's probably a bad example these days, talking politics, but if I'm making it for somebody important, right, I'm giving 72 hours. I know ideally that's going to be incredible dough, super flavorful. Can I use sourdough starter versus dry yeast? Joe, great question. Yes, substitute in. So a sourdough starter is going to be 100% hydrated, meaning I will remove 50 grams of water and 50 grams of flour from my recipe and add in 100 grams of starter, which is about 20%, is a good rule of thumb, starter to recipe. That seems to work ideally for that sourdough. I am from Chicago and I prefer thin crust pizza like Vito's and Nick's. I have been using cassata flour. Oh, interesting. I have not used that flour. Surasota flour. Sounds great. We'll look that up. Thank you, Sam. Or it says from Samsung. Baking steel, awesome. You said about temperature management for multiple pizzas. Yes. Can I repeat what I said about temperature management for multiple pizzas? My oven's preheated for an hour. I got one steel in there and I make my pizza. I launch it in. Let's say it bakes for 5 minutes. When I remove that and it's done, I'm going to make another pizza. And by the time my pizza's done, my oven my steel inside my oven is right back up to 500 degrees. They call that the rebound time. The rebound time of a baking steel is super fast. It's super efficient. That's what makes it work so well. The heat just stays at a constant temperature all the time. We lose a little bit of heat from the oven opening and the dough on top. However, it bounces right back up to 500 very efficiently. What about making a poolish? Yes, great question. We should try to do a recipe with that. Essentially, when we ferment our dough for 3 days, we're kind of creating its own poolish inside of the dough. It's like fermenting. Poolish generally you make a day before, then you mix it with your flour, and then you'll have a pizza that night. Essentially, it's like almost like a 24-hour pizza dough, if that makes sense. Just gives it a little head start. We'll talk more about that with maybe a recipe, but I feel as though when we do a 72-hour dough recipe, we are making a poolish. Can you ferment over 72 hours? Hey, Warren, great question. Yes. However, it really depends on the flour that you used. Some flours cannot stand to last that long. We can't, a flour over 3 days. I use a high gluten flour like King Arthur bread flour is good, or Central Milling is amazing. I find those are great. But when we ferment dough for a long time, the glutens really start to break down. And they break down, by the way, in 24 hours, which is why we ferment breads for 24 hours minimal. The glutens are much easier for our bodies to digest. So that they break down the glutens. And you can see this. Now, if you ferment the dough for 5 days and you try to stretch like a pizza out, you'll find yourself getting some holes in there if you're not really careful. That's the gluten being broken down by that fermentation. Again, this is why we can digest longer fermented breads much better than one I just made today with a lot of yeast. So again, you can, but really depends on the flour. Water temp, great question on the water temp. I don't know if I covered that, but my water is coming right out of my reverse osmosis on my sink, and it's room temp. Room temp is, again, today 69 degrees, 68 degrees in here. That's going into my dough. I don't need to make it warm because I'm proofing this at room temp as well, which is again is 68, 70 degrees. And can you use same dough recipe for bread? Hey, Dave, yes, 100%. This dough is incredible bread. I make bread, like if, for example, I always have this container in my fridge. I'm always making dough. If by Friday, let's say I'm not making pizzas anymore, I've got extra dough in here, I'll stretch this out and make bread out of it. Like make little ciabatta rolls. It's phenomenal. Really incredible. Or I'll make a big, big loaf of bread. It makes great, great breads. After preparing the dough, how long can I store it in the fridge? Again, I leave my dough container in the fridge all week long. I've left it in there for 7 days, and I'll take it out and bake breads. So again, it depends on the flour that you're using. I'm always using a very strong flour because I always want to make bread. Can the dough be placed in a bowl and covered with a plastic? Yes, great question. If you don't have these dough containers, grab a glass bowl, something, cover it with plastic wrap, does the same thing. I just like these because they have a lid built in. If you don't have those, a bowl is great. Yes. In fact, that's what I did all my early days. And as you get more practice in, you want to find some, like Cambro is a good brand on Amazon, Cambro. We sell dough containers. Find something that you can kind of fit into your fridge without interfering with everything else. Really comes in handy to have dough. Oh, and by the way, let's say I come in here on Monday, I have extra dough, I'm making a fresh batch. I'll just take my old dough and put it into my fresh dough. Just add it in. After I mix it, I'll just take whatever's left and just throw it right into my new batch. So I have old dough meets new dough, and man, that's good. That's a lot of questions. You guys, incredible questions.
Yeah.
Anybody else have anything else?
I was going to mention, Andres, that I don't have one of the dough containers like yours because with 3 kids, there's like never space in my fridge. What I found was Rubbermaid makes a nice one. It's I'm trying to explain. It's sort of a square, but it's got rounded corners, and it comes with an integrated lid that snaps on really solidly. And I have 2 of them, so I can make pizza and sourdough at the same time. Or in the case of that, remember I showed the sketch of my insane making 22 pizzas for people. I had both of those rolling. I made the 72-hour dough, and I made all the dough balls at once. And then they're pretty cheap. They're like $6-7. You can get them in place. Yeah.
That's
And
great.
it's a
Yeah,
nice,
so
it's a nice size that I can fit in my fridge, right? So
you could,
that's
you
an
could sneak it in.
advantage. Yeah,
That's huge.
easy to
Yeah.
clean, throw in the in the
Yeah.
dishwasher.
They come in handy for sure. And it's easier than a plastic wrap on a thing too. So, and oh, Joe, great question. Can I use this dough to make baguettes? So little secret, Joe, I make a lot of stuff with this dough. I make bagels. I've actually made English muffins. I didn't love the English muffins on there. Pretzels are great. Bread's great. And I mean, baguettes for sure. They're great on there. That's just a little different folding. Bread in general, bread sticks, like it's so versatile. I mean, it's good for anything. That's why I kind of stick thin crust pizza, pan pizza, almost use the same dough recipe for everything that we make. Now we have tweaks, but again, that's what we love. Oh, and Betty, how do you cook pizza with a gas oven? The same way, same exact way. It's going to preheat the same. One advantage I find with gas ovens is that I like to use the broiler. And when I turn the broiler on a gas oven, it typically goes on, it fires up almost right away, which is electric ovens. You kind of have to hack them a little bit. Gas ovens, right away, you see that gas go on. If anything with gas, you got to really micro manage your pizza times because it could really burn the top if you're using the broiler. Always rotate your pizzas in there. Gas ovens are great for breads too. Love them. We're building a new house. I've got a gas and electric oven that going in just to give everyone, I don't have a favorite. I like them both. Would you please repeat the brand of micro scale, please? Let's see. This is called, I think it's Salter. There's a brand called Salter, Salter. If it's still available on Amazon, just make sure it measures to the 1/100th of a gram. That's 0.01, right? Right? That's 100. 0.01 to the gram. Yeah, that's how tight this measurement is that we want for our scale for our yeast and anything else that you make it, right? You guys are amazing. Thank you, Mike. Say, where can we find you, Mike? Where are you located? Where can we find you on the social side and your book and all?
You can go to rohdesign.com and that's where all my stuff is. You can see the books. I have links. There's a page on that site, what are sketch notes, it sort of explains them. There's tons of links. There's lots of free resources as well, including the YouTube video, which will give you the overview if you want to get started with it. I'd recommend, I would encourage you, if you're going to make pizza this week, just get a piece of paper out and start playing around with this idea. It doesn't have to be like, this is completely illustrated because I'm a weirdo, but like, if you just want to draw little pictures of what you did as a way to remember, it's always going to be better than simply writing because you're using your visual and your verbal. So that would be my fun challenge for you this week. And then share it if you want to, at me on social media. I'm Rohdesign every place, Twitter and Threads and Instagram and Mastodon. So I'm also on LinkedIn. You can find me there too, I guess, if you want to. So yeah, that's the place.
Awesome. And everybody, to answer your questions too, we are going to follow up this email with this video. And Mike, we're going to have some notes we're going to share with you guys, direct links to everything that we talked about. And you can follow up with us there as well. But you guys were amazing today. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. We'll speak soon.